So welcome everybody. Today we are going to be doing part 2 of the presentation we started last month at the Access Lunchtime chapter. Specifically, we're talking about Access 2013 web apps. Although this lunchtime group will not always be about web apps, it will cover Access desktop applications as well in the future. But this second part of the presentation is going to show you how to link to your web app from SQL Server as opposed to from an Access desktop front end, and then how to extend the SQL side of things from SQL Server. Before we actually start on the presentation, I noticed several of you already have your microphones muted. So those that don't, during the presentation, if you are not talking, I would ask you to go ahead and mute your own connection so we get less feedback and loud, extra noise. But I do want to also encourage you all to register on the site if you have not already done so. And I will provide my email address at the end here, and I believe it is also on the lunchtime site. I'd like to hear some feedback. I noticed that there's several of the same attendees as the last time, which is great. But I'd like some feedback, I guess, from the attendees, if you're willing, as to what your background in Access is. Are you a new user? Are you a super user? Are you a developer? Where are you at in the spectrum so that I can know how to better tailor future discussions and presentations and make sure that it's serving the range of the group that we have. And then I'd also like some feedback, and you can do this directly on the lunchtime website as well, as to what you'd like to see in upcoming presentations. For example, the December presentation I actually will not be able to give because I will be in Mexico enjoying the warm weather as opposed to in Minnesota enjoying the cold. So besides seeing, maybe is everyone going to be out of town the last week in December, and we should postpone that or cancel that particular meeting. If anyone is interested in presenting either in December or at a future time, I would also like to hear that. So you could respond to that by email, or if you want to respond to that on chat, you can also, mention that, and we will try to take some notes here. So to go right along into the presentation, and this picks up from where we took off last time. So if you did miss last month's presentation, it is available on the web from our Access Lunchtime chapter, so you could review that as well. So the first things to cover is to link to a web app from SQL Server. You connect through SQL Server Management Studio with the same connection information that you used when you connected from Access. So that, first of all, you will need the server name, and again, we are going to get those from our database. This is our web database here. We had our web database in, pulling some screens over. We had it in our web location, and then we went to the little toolbar here, not the toolbar for Explorer or whatever your browser is, but this toolbar here, and chose Customize and Access. And that opened our web database in a local copy of Access. And then you go from the home screen, you go to the file screen, and then you select down here the connections section. And again, we did this last time, so this should be a repeat if you were here. There's several steps, and this is kind of a repeat to enabling connections. The first step is to allow it either only from your location or from any location. And the second step is to choose either read-only connections to enable or read-write connections to enable. I have already chosen read-only connections for this particular database, and so I'm going to go to this view connection information for the read-write to actually get the connection information. You can see that here in the middle, the server and database name are mentioned, but the rest of the information is not displayed until you hit that view here. So here is the connection information that you will need to connect up SQL Server Management Studio. The server, the database, the username, which you might notice is the same as the database name with underscore external reader or external writer, depending upon what you have, and then the password that you need to connect to it. And then if you're in SQL Server Management Studio, if you hit connect to a database engine, and I've already connected at one point, so this is filled in, but you would simply copy and paste the server name from that connection pop-up box into this box here. And then you will want to choose SQL Server Authentication and your login name. And the login name on this instance, because we're doing SQL Server to SQL Server, you don't have to preface this with the database name or the server name like you did from Access. And then the password, and then in the options, all right, let's see. Go back to my notes here. SQL Server Authentication, password, select options. Okay, and in the Connection Properties tab, you need to make sure you fill in Connect to Database. What that does here is you have to select the specific database to connect to, which is your database. Otherwise, it tries to log into the root of the database, like the master for that server, and you do not have permissions to connect to that. So in the login screen here, the database is not part of that, so you have to hit Options and go to Connection Properties to actually select your database. And then you connect, and that connects to your Azure SQL database, and you will notice that the system databases, I guess you can look at them, but I think you do have to put the specific database name to get the security correct. So this is your database with your SQL Azure database, and you are looking at that through your local copy of SQL Server Management Studio instead of through, your Access database. So that's how to connect. And then let's talk a little bit about information about what it looks like here. And I'm going to just push this to one side here so that I can view this a little bit better here. So this is what it looks like. Your tables are listed here in the table section, and they all have the schema access in front of them. So all the access schema tables would be the same tables that you see in your Access database. And there's actually 2 of them for each one. You notice one with images here after each of the tables, and that is because if you are using images in your tables, it does, behind the scenes, it does not actually store those images in the particular individual table. It actually stores them in these question mark images table. So you can select from these just like you would, within your Access database. So that select statements, and that tells me what I've got here in my table. If you're using the external writer instead of the external reader, you could execute an update statement in here. And you do have to remember that this is SQL syntax. This is not Access syntax. So, you need to make sure you use that. And there's just a few quirks and differences. If you Google differences between Access and SQL Server syntax, you can probably find a good list of those. They are things like for dates and times, you don't have to use the number sign on either side of them like you would in Access. In SQL Server, you can use a single quote to surround a date-time string. And there's other things like instead of using or in the like statements, I believe there's a percentage instead of I forget what Access is, but that's a different character for like an everything bucket. So you do have to use SQL syntax when you're updating here. What else do we have? The system tables that Access uses are here in this Access system schema. And those are things that you can look at. You can look at these column properties, for example, but you can never update those. So you, as an external writer, do not have update privileges on the Access system schema. So if but if you may find these properties, for example, in this Access system schema on the different tables, you may find those useful to you to be using in other things, perhaps some type of management task, and you have select rights to that, but you don't have update rights to that. Your queries are underneath the views in SQL Server. And you will see, again, the Access schema. And these queries are exactly what you have defined in your Access database. So, again, if we were to look at the Access database, we could see a parallel here. The tables that I have set up, the queries that I have set up, those are all paralleled, here in our SQL connection. But if you looked at them, if you looked, for instance, at the create, and again, you can select. You might see that it looks a little bit different, than what you're used to or what you are seeing from the Access side. For example, let me just pull up the same one here. This is order lookup. So this is what you see, from your view. And if you remember correctly from Access Web Apps, you can no longer see that in SQL View. But here is your SQL view to it, so you can access that from SQL. Unfortunately, it does not let you do any create, alter, drop or on tables, views, or store procedures. So you cannot, even though you can access this, and you could have potentially copy this and, make your own in your own connected SQL Server in the Access SQL Azure web database itself, you cannot make any changes to any of your tables as far as you can change the data in them, but you cannot change the schema of them. They have that locked down. So you do not have the proper privileges to make actual changes to these views or tables or store procedures. The Access Runtime Schema views, those are actually, according to Microsoft, and this is a quote, a schema which contains a number of items that we use in Access services to optimize the runtime behavior of your application. I would say that that's probably things like hints and things like that that they use. And, you're welcome to explore those and see what those look like. We can take a quick look here to see what that shows, if anything different. Looks like I've got a full outer join there, whereas I have an inner join, so it maybe modifies it slightly for its benefit, and uses that instead. I'm not sure what all the things that they do, in that, but you might find that interesting. And again, you can't change it, so, I'm not sure of what good it will do you, but at least you know what those runtime views are and what they're used for. And then we have the stored procedures. And the stored procedures are your macros. So here in my Access, here in my Access database, I have a couple macros I've defined. And those are down here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But they look very different. For instance, on this one, this is a data macro. And this macro creates a new record to parallel one that's already added. So, it's simple. It takes a bunch of parameters, and it sets a bunch of fields within a create record. If you look at that in from SQL, this will look very different. And I myself, even though I'm a T-SQL fan, I've looked at a couple of these. I write store procedures all the time in SQL, but this is not really how I do it. So they obviously have a new technique. But this is the what is created behind the scenes when you do your macro. It's very interesting. Then, okay, I think that's about it on this. Are there any specific questions about what things look like from SQL and how to look at these and change these and what you might do on this? Okay. We can always answer some later, too, if you've got some later. So now, how do we extend this? What if, for example, you have a SQL database, like I've got my own SQL Server here. How do I connect to this and extend it and use that information in my own database? And the answer to that is the first thing that you need to do in your database is set up a linked server to the database and server here. So under the server objects, there's a section called linked servers. And I've already done it here, but when you do it, you right-click on it, you select a new linked server, you enter a name for the link server here, and that's just, and you want to make it a simple name. Don't use dots in it. Use a common short name. For example, I called it the Freight Web App because what you want to do is to be able to get to that in a SQL select statement. And if you use the dots in it, then SQL gets confused because dots is what it uses between things like a server name, a database name, a schema name, and the table or view itself. So you set it up to be a simple name, and then you select, make sure other data source is selected instead of SQL Server, and then you use the provider of SQL Server Native Client 11, and then you use your connection information. So in data source, it prompts you down here, the name of the server or file name. That would be your server from your connection information back here on your Access connection string. The catalog is your database name. And again, I guess it doesn't really say, but this is your database name. And then on the security tab, that is where you are going to choose let's see. You want to be made using this security context, this bottom one down here, and then you want to put your login and your password in this area here. So that's all there is to it, and then you hit OK. And right here we've got a connected one, and you can see, you know, when we look at the properties here, that I've set the data source, the catalog. I left the provider string and location alone, the product name alone. I've used other data source and SQL Server Native Client 11. And then under security, I selected be made using the security context and the name and the password. So that's all done. So you can actually, you know, look at it and look at the server directly through here, just like you did by connecting directly to it. But more importantly than that, close some of these windows here to get them out of my way. You can go ahead and connect to them. So let's see some examples. And the way that you do that from your database, like I'm going to go into one of my databases here, this one right here, and I'm going to open up a query. And you want to select, and you would use the syntax as opposed to just, you know, your table or your schema and your table. You would use syntax of the link server and then a dot and then the database name and then another dot and then the schema, which is access all the time, and then the table name. So you could use, for example, and again, we're going to use our simple name. We're going to use freight, and there is, I believe, well, it's not showing up here, but all right, so once you put it in there, again, it's not doing a very good job at showing you what you want here, but let's see if I can. Nope. I'm going to copy that from my Access here. A little simpler, and I will not then mistake in typing because it's such a user-friendly name, right? And then access, and then whatever your table name is. So if we're going to be using shipments, for example, or let's do something a little simpler, let's do driver. What did I do here? So I didn't put a open parentheses here on. We use square brackets in SQL to make these different. And then I am in here, I am in this database. I'm not in the other one, but because I have a link server set up here, I can access information from the other database. And you can do the same kind of things. You're logged in with the same permissions. You could do an update on this. You could do a select on it. You could go in and create a view in your database in the test freight schedule that had as a part of it, another a piece of what you're doing there. For example, I created this one. I don't know this extended property stuff, but this goes in here and hello, whoever just joined us, if you could go ahead and mute yourself, that would be awesome. Thank you. So this view, for example, was created in the test freight schedule, and all it does is select everything from the schedule appointments, which is, I believe, a view in the table. But I can create it here, and then I can select, here and take a look at what's in there, or I can select directly, into the table itself. But because you can do things like this, you could then create a combination of views or information from your local database, SQL database, and your Azure Access database. So that's a very useful thing to do. If you had, say, a reporting server or something like that, and you wanted to pull information from your Access app in as well and report on it, you could do so with a connected or a linked server, and then you can access that information from that. And then you can also do, besides linking it to other data, you could do things, that you were not able to do, that you were limited in Azure and could not do. For instance, I wrote this store procedure, and the store procedure uses this big select statement where it's really doing like a summarizing on things. You can't do anything like that, nesting and summarizing and pivoting in SQL Azure through the Access web apps, but you can in straight SQL. And so I could run this routine, with this added functionality that SQL will let you do, but that you can't do in SQL Azure within the Access database. And I don't know what parameters to use here and what my data is. I'm taking a guess here. This might return nothing. And this does take a minute because it's doing a pivot. In any case, you can, it did return, no it didn't, yeah it did return one thing. But this is like a pivot table kind of syntax, which is something way beyond SQL Azure in the Access web app scenario can do, but you can do that in straight SQL Server using a local SQL Server that you have that you link to Access Web Apps. All right, that is really it. And again, I put my direct email there, my Twitter account. A lot of this information, the connection information, I got from a very nice book called Professional Access 2013 Programming. And so it is available for you to use as well with detailed steps. And we will hopefully have recorded this presentation, and then you will be able to also, use this as a reference point. So I'd like to go ahead and open it up at this time. I know we're a little shorter than usual, but we're on Thanksgiving holiday weekend here. Are there any questions about connecting to SQL Azure through SQL Server Management Studio and extending it with SQL itself that you have? So I do have one question here, and that says, if you can't do it in SQL Azure in the Access Web App scenario, does that mean it's better to connect Access Web Apps to SQL Server instead of Azure? I guess I want to be clear. Since you cannot modify the SQL Azure web app database itself, the one that's created from your web app or that's your web app is hosted on, you cannot add a new view or anything like that within that from SQL. So you can't do anything special and fancy within SQL Azure, your web app database only, because Microsoft has locked that down. It's part of your Office 365 account. If you had a hosted SQL Azure site that was not part of your Office site, but on a standard SQL Azure site, then the same type of added functionality could be done from there. So you could connect to this not just from a local SQL account, but from a SQL Azure account or a host SQL account of some kind, as long as you had the proper security in that to be able to create views or create stored procedures or do whatever, then you should be able to use those directly, even if they're SQL Azure accounts, just not your particular Office 365 web database. I hope that makes sense. Okay, Jeff Conrad has posted to everybody, if you're using Access Web Apps with an on-premise SharePoint 2013, then you are using a local SQL server. So that's a great point to bring up. You're not even using SQL Azure. Is that true? Or you're using SQL Azure and you just have permissions to it? I guess I don't know the answer to that for sure. Jeff, are you confident in that answer? So certainly I would imagine in that instance, whatever version of SQL is being used, since it's your own hosted SharePoint site, you do have the correct permissions. Okay, beautiful. Jeff, you're working with the Microsoft product team. So it's straight whatever version of SQL is supported by on the SharePoint 2013 site, or what you have to supply it if you're doing an on-premise SharePoint 2013 site, you're probably supplying it with whatever local instance of SQL that you have currently defined. Okay, so it does look like we do need either SQL 2012 or 2014 currently for an on-premise setup of SharePoint 2013 or 2016. That's great to know. So then you would not have some of the same constraints as you would. I would be interested to see that and see what those look like connected-wise, to see if there's the same schemas associated with those as far as like the access runtime schemas, and whether those are also locked down or not. Those are great questions. Also, while we're chatting, I do want to clarify one question that was brought up last time that I think we did not answer properly or completely. And I did correct this on the video or the PowerPoint slide that was posted. There was a question about the size of the Office 365 Azure databases, and we were unsure as to what it would be. And of course, if you're doing your own hosted site here where you've got your own SQL Server, there should not be any limitations on that, whether you're doing it through a hosted Azure site or through a local SQL Server. But if you have an Office 365 account and you're doing it through that, then you've got your 1 gigabyte limit. And that is different than your standard access limit. Your standard access for a desktop limit is 2 gigabytes. So you do need to be aware of that. If you're going to be going to more than 1 gigabyte of data, you will want to either pull that onto an on-premise site, or you want to divide it up so that you're using multiple databases. So Giorgio asked a question, what I mean by lockdown. So if you are in, just to clarify here, if you are in, back here, and it's this statement right here, you cannot create, alter, or drop tables, views, or stored procedures. So if you are using an Office 365 web app, then it has SQL Azure as a back end, but the administrator access to that is controlled by Office 365. You, even as an Office 365 administrator on your own account, do not have privileges in that web or in that SQL Azure database to do things like create, alter, or drop tables, views, or stored procedures. So there's no way for you to get to that and actually make changes on, for example, a query that you have from your local SQL Server Management Studio connection to that. You can update data if you're connected through the external writer, and you can read data through either the reader or writer. And you can look at what's there. You can do a create on a query to look at or copy or whatever, but you can't actually drop a query or create a new one. So they've locked that down. That's what I mean. Not allowed for you to do that. Other questions today?
Barbara?
This
Barbara?
is Maria. This is Maria.
Sorry.
That's all right.
No, because I thought there was another Barbara participating in the. I thought it was Barbara actually doing the presentation. So.
There was a Barbara on for a while. I think she's not anymore. But sorry, I should have reintroduced myself at the beginning.
No, I just wanted to. if these modifications that you mentioned are not allowed to someone who is using SQL Azure, and you actually need to make these modifications which are not allowed to be done, what do? Do you have to turn to someone else who makes these changes that you say that you're not allowed to? Because you said you're only allowed to update, and but you cannot create or something else which now escapes me. But if you actually need to do these modifications such as create, what do you do if you're using Azure rather than SQL Server?
So you would need to do those modifications from within the Access platform itself. Right. So it will let you do them from the Access copy. So if you need to create tables or whatever, you can do that through Access, but it does not allow you to do that through SQL. You can connect to them, you can update data, you can, if you've got the writer connection, and you can read data with either one. But if you want to do modifications to your queries or tables or add a new one, then you've got to do that through the Access application interface. And I believe the reason for that is so that they can lock down the types of things that are being done.
Well, on the other hand, you actually can, if you have an SQL Server backend, from what you said, that's usable there.
It sounds like Jeff is saying that you have more control if you've got your own hosted SharePoint site and you're doing web apps through there. I've got to be honest, I have not tried that, and so I don't know what the full limitations are. Since there's still a web app, I can't imagine that everything is allowed because, it's got to contain the information in all of its supporting tables to be able to interpret what's in the SQL database and display it in a web form basis. And so it can't possibly allow you to do all of the same kind of things as you can on a full-fledged SQL Server, but it must allow you more permissions if you've got the local.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, since you can still do these modifications within Access desktop client, then I think it's more or less the same thing because you can still create or do whatever through the Access interface. So you're not actually limited. You're not constrained.
Yeah, and I think the whole reason to go to SQL to connect to it would be if you needed to do something beyond what you can do here in Access. And in particular, if you need to connect this to other data in your organization, that's when you would want to go to connecting this to SQL.
You cannot do that if you use an Azure backend rather than SQL Server. You cannot connect with other data sources.
Yes, you can, as long as you do it from your other data sources. So in my example here, I have a local server, and I am connected to this SQL Azure database here. And then I can add in other local data and that kind of stuff. And I can, return results in a reporting system or whatever other system I might have. I can use the results from the web app in other apps through connecting them like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. Again, if you would please try to use this email or register on the site and provide me some kind of feedback with what you would like to see in the next few months as far as topics, and maybe whether you think you're going to be able to make the end of December, or whether or not, if I have we've had maybe as many as 8 people here. If I get 8 responses and say I'm busy at the end of December, then we may cancel that meeting. But we'll see. We'll see about getting you a different presenter, and hopefully some people actually will be able to attend that. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us next time.